For 400 years, the universe agreed on one absolute truth. Humanity was dead. They were a cautionary tale of a primitive species swallowed by the dark. But the dead rarely stay buried forever, and today they came knocking on the door of the gods to collect a debt. High Arbiter. Vincent adjusted the heavy gold-threaded collar of his ceremonial robes, masking a sigh as he looked down upon the grand assembly. The Zenith Spire, a marvel of engineering suspended in the neutral zone of the Orion Cygnus arm, was supposed to be a place of universal reverence. Instead, it had devolved into a bureaucratic bazaar. For 3 hours, the assembly had been debating the same tired agenda: the territorial and corporate rights to the Sol system. The radiation levels have decayed to an acceptable baseline. High Arbiter, Representative Maxwell announced. Maxwell was the chief liaison for the Interstellar Mining Conglomerate, a corporate entity that wielded as much power as most sovereign armadas. Our latest probes indicate that the third planet, Earth, as the deceased natives called it, still holds massive, untapped veins of cobalt, titanium, and rare earth silicates deep within its mantle. The crust is glassed, yes, but beneath that glass is a treasury waiting to be claimed. Vincent leaned back in his anti-gravity throne, his eyes scanning the hundreds of floating podiums where representatives of 1,000 species muttered in agreement. The Sol system was designated a universal graveyard, interjected Dominic, the staunch and traditionalist ambassador of the core worlds. By the Treaty of the Long Silence, it is forbidden to disturb the resting place of a sentient species, even one as volatile as the Terrans. The Terrans have been extinct for 4 centuries, Dominic, Maxwell shot back, his voice echoing through the vast, vaulted chamber. They were wiped out by the Scourge. They couldn't adapt. They refused our offer of sanctuary, tried to fight a biomechanical swarm with projectile weapons and rudimentary fission drives, and they burned for it, leaving trillions of credits worth of resources untouched out of a misplaced sense of nostalgia for a species that essentially committed suicide is illogical. Vincent rubbed his temples. The Terran extinction was a historical footnote most of the galaxy had comfortably moved past. When the Scourge, a terrifying, ravenous armada of bioengineered horrors, had swept through the Outer Rim, humanity had screamed for aid. The Grand Assembly, calculating that defending the primitive, newly spacefaring humans would cost too much in military assets, had voted for quarantine. They locked the Sol system behind a blockade and let the Scourge consume them. It was a cold, pragmatic choice. "Order," Vincent commanded, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. The murmuring died down immediately. "Representative Maxwell, your petition to strip mine the Sol system will be put to a vote. But understand, if the planetary crust is destabilized, your conglomerate will be held solely responsible for the containment of any remaining biological contaminants." Maxwell smiled. "I assure you, High Arbiter, nothing has survived on that irradiated rock for 400 years. It is completely, utterly A violent tremor ripped through the Zenith Spire. The vibration was so intense that Vincent was thrown forward against his console. Above them, the grand crystalline chandelier, a structure the size of a dreadnought, swayed dangerously. Alarms, a sound unheard in the council chamber for nearly 2 centuries, began to howl in a deafening, oscillating pitch. "Report!" Vincent shouted, scrambling to regain his composure. "What was that? A seismic event?" "Seismic events do not occur on a space station, High Arbiter," Security Chief Bradley stated over the central comms channel, his voice tight with an uncharacteristic panic. "We've just been subjected to a kinetic docking maneuver. Something just slammed into the Spire's primary diplomatic airlock." "Slammed?" Dominic gasped from his podium. "The orbital defense grid should have vaporized any unauthorized vessel." "The grid didn't register it," Bradley replied, his fingers flying across holographic interfaces as data streamed into the chamber's central projector. "The vessel has no recognized energy signature, no dark matter drives, no zero-point fields. It's operating on—" Bradley paused, as if struggling to comprehend the telemetry. "It's operating on a heavily modified, ultra-dense, cold fusion engine, and its hull, it's completely coated in some sort of radar-absorbent metamaterial. It essentially drifted through our sensor net like a ghost until it engaged physical thrusters to breach the airlock." "Who is it?" Maxwell demanded. "Pirates? Scavengers?" "I don't know," Bradley said. "But they are cutting through the outer blast doors. The thermal output is off the charts. Deploying the Praetorian Guard to the antechamber now." Vincent watched the holographic feed in stunned silence. The Zenith Spire was impenetrable. It was guarded by the most elite fleets in the known universe. Yet, an unidentified ship had bypassed everything and physically grafted itself to the station's hull. "Seal the council chamber," Vincent ordered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Activate the adamantium bulkheads. Nothing gets in here." Massive, meter-thick slabs of dark alloy slammed down over the grand entryways. The representatives in the room began to panic, their podiums bumping into one another as a chaotic frenzy took hold. Vincent gripped the armrests of his throne, staring intensely at the massive sealed doors at the far end of the hall. Through the localized comms, they could hear the frantic shouts of Bradley's security forces in the antechamber. Plasma fire erupted. The searing hum of energy weapons echoed through the audio feed, followed by heavy, concussive blasts that sounded suspiciously like kinetic explosives. Then, agonizingly, the comms went dead. The council chamber fell into a terrified, breathless silence. 400 representatives, along with High Arbiter Vincent, stared at the massive adamantium doors. The hum of the station's life support was the only sound left in the universe. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Thud. The sound was heavy, metallic, and too deliberate. It reverberated through the dense floor plating, shaking the air inside the chamber. Thud. Vincent felt the blood drain from his face. Someone, or something, was on the other side of the adamantium bulkhead. Thud. It wasn't an explosive trying to breach the door. It wasn't a plasma cutter trying to melt the lock. It was a physical knock. 3 slow, rhythmic strikes, polite but dripping with terrifying confidence. "Keep weapons trained on the door," Vincent whispered to the surviving automated defense turrets, his voice trembling. A high-pitched mechanical whine pierced the silence. The center of the massive doors began to glow a violent, blinding cherry red. In a matter of seconds, the impenetrable adamantium slagged into molten liquid. A concentrated thermal charge, burning at temperatures that defied standard physics, blew the center of the doors completely inward. Smoke and ash billowed into the pristine council chamber. Through the settling dust, a silhouette emerged. It was bipedal, tall, broad, and clad in a hulking, battered suit of environmental armor. The armor was completely utilitarian, void of any sleek alien aesthetics. It was all hard angles, thick ablative plating, and exposed hydraulic joints. The metal was scored with deep plasma burns, acid scars, and physical gouges. Across the chest plate, partially obscured by carbon scoring, was a faded insignia, and words etched in a dead language. Lockheed Raytheon Coalition. Deep Void Division. The figure stepped fully into the light. In its right hand, it held an archaic, massive kinetic rotary rifle. In its left, it dragged something heavy by a thick chain. The universal translator in Vincent's ear whirred, struggling to process the sudden influx of a dialect it hadn't heard in centuries. "Security forces!" The figure's voice boomed through the external speakers of his helmet, distorted by static but unmistakably clear. "Are taking a nap. They will wake up with a headache. Nobody is dead. Yet." The figure reached up and engaged the release seals on his helmet. With a sharp hiss of pressurized air, the helmet lifted and detached. A collective gasp echoed through the council chamber. Representative Dominic physically recoiled from his podium. Maxwell's jaw dropped in sheer, unadulterated horror. Standing before the gods of the galaxy was a human. He was older, his face weathered and scarred. A jagged line of raw tissue ran from his jawline up to his temple, and his eyes, cold, steel gray, and burning with a quiet, suppressed rage, locked directly onto High Arbiter Vincent. "Captain Sullivan Hayes," the man said, his voice raspy, echoing in the cavernous hall without the need for an amplifier. "Terran Coalition Fleet, command vessel, the Bradbury." "Impossible," Vincent breathed, gripping his podium. You're extinct. The Scourge." "Extinct?" Sullivan offered a dark, humorless smirk. "Is that what the paperwork says? I suppose it's easier to write a species off as dead than to look out the window and watch them burn." Sullivan stepped forward, ignoring the automated turrets that tracked his every movement. He violently yanked the heavy chain in his left hand, swinging the object he had been dragging forward. It bounced across the polished marble floor and skidded to a halt directly at the base of Vincent's throne. The chamber erupted in shrieks of terror. It was the severed head of a Scourge command unit. The biomechanical nightmare was enormous, its mandibles locked in a permanent frozen scream. Thick, viscous black fluid leaked from its severed neck onto the pristine floor. "You left us to die," Sullivan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low timbre. "When the swarm hit Saul, we begged for an intervention. We were barely out of our own cradle, flying ships held together by duct tape and dreams, and you locked the door. We had to contain the threat," Vincent stammered, trying to maintain his authority. "The Scourge was a force of nature. If we had intervened, the casualties to the core worlds would have been catastrophic. It was a quarantine of necessity." "Force of nature," Sullivan chuckled. The sound was hollow. "That's funny, because when we realized you weren't coming, we didn't just lay down and die. We went deep, down into the Mariana Trench, under the ice of Europa. We built cities in the dark. We stripped every last ounce of resource from our world to survive. Lockheed, Boeing, governments, cartels, every line divided us, erased in a single night. We spent 400 years in the dark, Arbiter. We didn't just survive. We adapted." Sullivan kicked the massive severed head of the Scourge. "It took us a century to figure out how to kill them, another century to push them off Earth, and 2 more centuries to hunt them down to the very edge of the Andromeda expanse. The Scourge is gone, Arbiter. We exterminated them down to the last drone." The Council was dead silent. A species, operating entirely in secret, had single-handedly annihilated the greatest existential threat the galaxy had ever known. "But that's not why I'm here," Sullivan continued, reaching into a pouch on his tactical belt. He pulled out a small, sleek data drive. It didn't look human. It looked distinctly Centaurian. "When we finally cracked the neural network of the last Scourge Queen," Sullivan said, holding the drive up, "we found something interesting in her genetic memory matrix. Code. Navigation subroutines. Specifically, subroutines guiding them directly to the Sol system 400 years ago. Vincent's blood ran ice cold. "They didn't stumble upon Earth by accident," Sullivan said, his voice now echoing with the fury of billions of ghosts. "They were directed, and we found the financial ledgers inside the Centauri Swiss Galactic Bank vaults. Trillions of credits transferred from corporate shadow accounts directly to black market bioengineers." Sullivan's eyes drifted from Vincent to Representative Maxwell. Maxwell shrank back, his skin paling. "You wanted our rocks?" Sullivan whispered, the malice in his voice wrapping around the chamber like a noose. "But you didn't want the political headache of wiping out a protected, developing species. So you bought a plague. You paid the scourge to glass Earth so you could swoop in centuries later and mine the ashes." "This is an outrage," Maxwell shouted, though his voice cracked. "Fabrications. I demand this savage be arrested." Sullivan didn't move, but his hand casually rested on the grip of his kinetic rifle. "I'm not here to arrest anyone," Sullivan said softly. "I'm not here to petition the court, and I'm certainly not here to ask for our system back." He pressed a button on his wrist gauntlet. Instantly, the massive holographic projector in the center of the room flared to life. The feed wasn't coming from the station's sensors. It was being broadcast directly from Sullivan's ship. It showed the space immediately surrounding the Zenith Spire. Where there had been empty void just moments before, space began to tear. Not standard warp signatures, but violent, tearing rifts in reality. One by one, massive, jagged dreadnoughts dropped out of the void. They were brutalist nightmares of engineering, impossibly large, bristling with rail guns, fusion torpedoes, and armor forged in the fires of a dead world. Hundreds of them, thousands of them. They blotted out the stars, completely surrounding the station and the galactic fleet that guarded it. "I came here to deliver a message," Sullivan said, as the Council watched the human armada eclipse the light of the local sun. "Humanity is no longer extinct, and as of 5 minutes ago, you are no longer the apex predators of this galaxy." Sullivan dropped the Centaurian data drive onto the floor next to the scourge head. "Consider this your eviction notice. We're taking our galaxy back. For 4 centuries, humanity was a footnote, a dead species swallowed by the dark. But the dead rarely stay buried. They didn't just survive. They evolved, weaponized their rage, and broke the silence. Now, one human stands before the cosmic gods, bringing an armada, a reckoning, and pure, unadulterated vengeance." The grand holographic projector, bathing the council chamber in cold blue light, flickered as massive Terran dreadnoughts maneuvered into orbit. Arbiter Vincent felt breath catch in his throat. The Zenith Spire, the supposedly impenetrable fortress of galactic diplomacy, was completely surrounded. Representative Maxwell stumbled backward, his earlier bravado shattering like fragile glass under the crushing weight of reality. The interstellar mining conglomerate had fleets, yes, but they were corporate security vessels designed to intimidate restless workers and fend off poorly armed pirates. They were never meant to engage a truly hardened armada of human survivors. Captain Sullivan Hayes watched the alien dignitaries cower, his scarred face remaining an unreadable mask of absolute resolve. For generations, his ancestors had whispered legends of the Grand Assembly, imagining wise and benevolent gods steering the universe. Seeing them now, terrified and pathetic, filled him with profound disgust. "You thought the Sol system was a graveyard." Sullivan's voice cut through the rising panic, echoing off the adamantium walls. "You thought you could sweep our ashes into the cosmic rug and profit off our bones. Vanguard Logistics, BlackRock Stellar Interplanetary, State Street Void Cores. We know all your hidden shell subsidiaries. Dominic, the Core World's ambassador, gripped his podium with trembling, pale hands. What do you want, Terran? If you fire upon this station, you will ignite a war that will consume the entire Orion Cygnus arm. The United Galactic Defense Initiative will respond with absolute prejudice. Sullivan let out a dry, rasping laugh that sent shivers down the spines of the assembled politicians. The Defense Initiative? Ambassador, who do you think builds their targeting sensors? Who supplies the rare elements for their warp drives? We have been awake for 400 years, Dominic. We did not just build military ships. Sullivan tapped another sequence on his wrist gauntlet. The holographic display shifted from the terrifying armada outside to a cascade of financial data, corporate charters, and encrypted bank ledgers. When we broke the quarantine, we did not announce ourselves, Sullivan explained, pacing slowly across the polished marble floor. We watched, we learned. We saw that this galaxy is not ruled by fleets or ideals, but by profit. So we adapted our tactics. Have you ever heard of the Ghost Corporation, Apex Interstellar Group? They bought a controlling stake in the Centauri Swiss Galactic Bank 3 decades ago. We are Apex. Chaos erupted within the council chamber. The Centauri Swiss Bank held the sovereign debt of over 60% of the core worlds. That is impossible! Maxwell shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. No unknown entity could pass the regulatory oversight of the Financial Commission. We run background checks on every shell company in the sector. Sullivan smirked, pointing a heavy armored finger at the corporate representative. Your oversight committees were bought out by our dummy corporations, using the very wealth you tried to steal from Earth. We own your debts. We own your supply chains. We won. Vincent slumped into his floating throne, the oppressive reality crushing his spirit. The humans had not just brought a gun to a knife fight. They had bought the entire arena beforehand. What is your endgame, Captain? Vincent asked, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying across the silent, terrified chamber. If you control the bank, and you have this immense armada, why reveal yourselves right now? You could have continued pulling the strings from the shadows indefinitely. Sullivan stopped pacing. He looked down at the severed, leaking head of the Scourge Queen, then back up to the High Arbiter slowly. Because pulling strings from the shadows does not look you in the eye, Sullivan growled, his voice vibrating with a primal intensity. Because hiding does not honor the 30 billion men, women, and children who burned while you sat in this ivory tower debating profit margins. My great-grandfather died breathing toxic ash in the ruins of Chicago, so that I could stand here today. We are not here for negotiations, and we are not here for revenge. We are here for justice. And we are starting with the absolute dismantling of the interstellar mining conglomerate and every corrupt executive. Maxwell lunged toward his podium control panel, his hands scrambling frantically across the glowing keys. Security! Activate the emergency beacon. Broadcast a Priority 1 distress signal to the conglomerate home fleet. Target this human and vaporize him, he screamed, abandoning all diplomatic decorum. Sullivan did not even flinch. Before Maxwell could finish his command, the entire podium went dark. The glowing keys faded, and the emergency beacon subroutine was instantly overridden. I told you, Maxwell, Sullivan said softly, an icy smile touching his lips. We own the supply chain. Palantir Deep Space Analytics wrote your security software 70 years ago. The realization hit Maxwell like a physical blow. He collapsed against the dead console, weeping openly. The mighty corporate empire, spanning thousands of star systems, had been hollowed out from the inside by human ghosts. High Arbiter. Vincent stared at the broken representative, then turned his gaze back to the imposing figure of Captain Hayes. The power dynamic of the entire galaxy had shifted in less than an hour. If you dismantle the conglomerate, the galactic economy will collapse entirely, Vincent pleaded, trying to appeal to the human and his highly logical and strategic sense. Trillions of citizens will suffer. Starvation, civil war, chaos. You cannot punish the innocent for the crimes of a corrupt corporate elite. The Assembly will submit to your terms, but please, do not burn the universe down just because you possess the matches. We know about suffering, Sullivan replied, his tone unyielding but devoid of malice. We lived in the dark for 4 centuries. We ate synthesized algae and buried our dead in mass graves carved from frozen bedrock. We are not monsters, Arbiter. We will not glass your worlds or unleash plagues upon your children. We are vastly better. He activated another command on his wrist. Outside the Zenith Spire, the massive Terran dreadnoughts began to shift formation. Rather than aiming their weapons at the station, they slowly turned outward, creating a solid, impregnable ring around the diplomatic hub. We are placing the Grand Assembly and the core worlds under a state of permanent administrative quarantine, Sullivan declared, his voice booming with absolute authority. From this moment forward, the Sol system is the new capital of galactic commerce and defense. The interstellar mining conglomerate assets will be fully seized and redistributed to rebuild the frontier colonies you completely abandoned. Maxwell, along with the entire executive board, will face a Terran military tribunal for crimes against humanity. Any civilization that attempts to violate the quarantine will face the full, unbridled wrath of the Lockheed Deep Void Armada. Dominic swallowed hard, looking at the tactical display. The blockade was flawless. "You are imprisoning us?" he asked, disbelief washing over his features. "You are locking the entire galactic government inside its own meeting hall." Sullivan walked over to the melted remains of the adamantium blast doors, his heavy boots crunching on the cooled slag. "Imprisonment is just such a very harsh word," Sullivan mused, looking over his shoulder. "Consider it a protective perimeter. The universe is a dangerous place, Ambassador. We just want to make sure you stay safe while we clean up the terrible mess you left behind." With those final words, Sullivan secured his heavily scarred helmet back onto his environmental armor. The hiss of pressurized seals locking into place echoed ominously in the silent chamber. He did not look back at the assembled politicians. He simply walked out, his heavy footsteps retreating down the corridor, leaving the newly terrified gods of the galaxy completely alone in the cold dark. High Arbiter Vincent watched him go, a profound sense of dread settling over his soul. The era of the Grand Assembly had ended. The Terrans had returned from the grave, not as conquerors, but as the new wardens. Outside, aboard the bridge of the flagship, Sullivan took his command seat. The vast expanse of space stretched out before him, filled with the comforting silhouettes of human engineering. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "the Assembly is transmitting a universal broadcast. They are declaring unconditional surrender to the Terran coalition." Sullivan leaned back in his chair, staring at the main view screen. "Acknowledge receipt," he said softly, "and open a channel to Earth. Tell them the quarantine is officially over. It is time for humanity to finally step into the light." The transmission pierced the veil of the void, racing across the stars toward a world that had healed its wounds in secret. Deep beneath the oceans, inside sprawling subterranean metropolises, Billions of humans listened as the news broke. The long silence was broken. The galaxy belonged to them once more. They had not just survived the fire, they had become the flame. The history books of 1,000 alien species would be rewritten tomorrow. They would tell the terrifying, awe-inspiring story of the day the dead came knocking, and how the universe was forced to answer the door. In the aftermath, the Zenith Spire remained a gilded cage, floating silently amidst the imposing shadows of the Terran dreadnoughts. High Arbiter Vincent stood alone at the massive observation window, gazing at the iron ring surrounding them. He realized the ultimate irony of their hubris. In their desperate attempt to control the galaxy and extract its wealth without consequence, they had forged the very instrument of their absolute downfall. The humans had learned cruelty from the stars, but they had perfected the art of resilience in the suffocating darkness of their ruined home. As the distant sun caught the scarred hull of a passing human battleship, illuminating the faded letters of its designation, Vincent closed his eyes. The grand galaxy had indeed once declared humanity entirely extinct, but the entire galaxy, as it unfortunately turned out, was catastrophically and irrevocably wrong today. If this tale of survival, defiance, and humanity's triumphant return sent chills down your spine, don't let the story end here. Smash that like button, share this video with your fellow Terrans, and subscribe to our channel for more epic sci-fi sagas. Your support fuels our transmissions across the cosmos. Drop a comment below on how you would face the Galactic Council. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars, because humanity is never truly out of the fight.